You ever walk by a vacant lot that's been vacant for decades and wonder why that is? Did you know that a potentially toxic piece of real estate could cost millions of dollars to clean up in a handful of years? Adam Garrett-Clark here. I'm a realtor, tiny house dreamer, and bioremediation nerd. And what you're about to hear is part of the Prescott Experiment. It's a project I'm working on through the nonprofit I founded, Neighborship. Quick backstory: in 2015, I founded and lived in a tiny home community in West Oakland with five other friends. It was totally off grid, incredibly affordable, and happened to be on top of a former junkyard. This is what is called a brownfield. It's any piece of land that has the potential to be toxic. So, the Prescott Experiment is a project to investigate the toxins on a piece of that former junkyard and to pilot, this is the twist, to pilot a potential remediation approach that few have tried with mushrooms and plants, bioremediation. So the project is funded by the California Department of Toxic Substance Control, the DTSC, and they're one of the groups that regulates brownfields and their cleanups. And this is through a grant program called the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant. And today I'm speaking with two of the technical advisors to this grant from the Center for Creative Land Recycling, CClear. I'm speaking with Sebastian Harrison and Jim Bergdoll, who have been working with me to help consult in writing the grant and as we muddle through working through this 2+ year project. And one of my biggest points of curiosity as I've been getting into this world of brownfield remediation is, why does it take so long and why does it cost so much money? It's been a deep point of curiosity, and we actually got to a satisfying answer in this conversation. And I'm excited for you all to listen to it. It really, in my mind, demystifies and kind of breaks down a lot of the acronyms and scariness of the bureaucracy of remediating brownfields. So enjoy. I think the starting point would just be for one of you guys to kind of introduce the org CClear. What is it? What do you guys do? And how are you guys involved in the grant that I'm a part of? I'll throw it to Sebastian.
Super cool. So I'll start by quickly introducing myself. My name's Sebastian Harrison. I'm an environmental engineer. I work out of the North LA area. I've been supporting CClear as an independent consultant for about 3.5 years now. Before working for CClear, I used to work in the chemical industry for both DuPont and Chemours. It was really a tremendous experience, as you can imagine, because the people that have the most contaminated sites tend to be the chemical companies, the pharmaceutical companies, and big industry. So it was a great way to just get exposure to a lot of different types of contamination. But as you can imagine, it was much heavier on the heart working on the corporate side of things versus working for an organization like CClear. So I was a COVID layoff, and then I took a nice little break, and then was happy to find CClear right about the time the ECRG grant started. So the ECRG work is how I met Adam. That's the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant.
Really, thanks. I can never remember that acronym, by the way.
Right? Oh, it's a tricky one. And then we say ECRG grant, which doesn't make sense because we're repeating the G.
Right.
But it's such a cool thing to help launch in California. We're talking over $100 million towards the revitalization of brownfields in California, and not just that, putting equity first, and trying to make sure that whatever comes next for these properties is helping the communities where they are. And so CClear's job as a technical assistance provider is to help people imagine these projects, put together their applications, and really try to be the turnkey service to make people a success. And CClear is a national nonprofit dedicated towards the sustainable and equitable reuse of brownfields. We work in U.S. EPA, Region 9 and 10. And I think one of the biggest advantages of the organization is the different partnerships. So working directly with U.S. EPA, DTSC, the regulatory side of things, our sponsors and different consultants, the people that come to our events, and then as well nonprofits such as yourself, and then really a heavy, municipality and planning type audience because, it tends to be cities and counties that are burdened by these sites. Um, all that said, over to you, Jim, for an intro. Unless there's anything else you want me to add, Adam. I know that was a little bit long-winded.
No, that was great. That was perfect. Of course, DTSC is Department of Toxic Substances Control. And I don't know, maybe at some point you guys can help me understand like how the DTSC and the EPA interact. But Jim, give us a little bit about your background, how you got, what you did before C-Clear, and what you do with C-Clear, and your connection to our project.
Yeah, well, this work with equitable revitalization projects on brownfields is really a perfect continuation of my career for the past 30 years. I've been involved in developing mainly affordable housing, but different kinds of community projects, community enterprises on land, and most of that 30 years has been in the Oakland area, Oakland, East Bay, and Bay Area, San Francisco. I've worked for the private sector. I've worked mostly though in the public sector for the county of San Francisco, and is for the Alameda County and a city within the Alameda County. But I've also spent even more time working for nonprofit organizations as a housing developer and advisor and different things. So I consider myself an affordable and other community developer / urban planner and policy. Now, I've done a lot of different things, helping advise on policy and programs. And so the thing I like about C-Clear and the mission that DTSC has introduced with this ECRG is that it sort of brings together a community-based nonprofits like yourselves or city-sponsored projects of a public benefit nature like affordable housing or various things, and combines that with just the reality of any any real estate transaction which involves land, and it has to be ready. The land has to be ready for human occupation of something other. So anyway, I'm basically see myself in real estate, and C-Clear was involved when I was a nonprofit developer. I was introduced to C-Clear over 25 years ago because they helped me and the nonprofit I was working for to acquire and clean up a really ugly brownfield. Actually, it was an auto salvage yard, junkyard, not similar to the uses at your resilience hub, previous uses at the resilience hub. And we cleaned that up, and over a period of several years, turned like 5 acres of land in East Oakland into affordable housing.
Wow.
With yards and play areas and things that we didn't want any institutional controls. So we worked with DTSC and also the EPA grants to get it cleaned up.
Wow. What can you say the address of that development?
It's 10800 and 10900 Eads Avenue, which I will always remember. I worked on those 2 phases of the projects for like 6 or 7 years to get it cleaned up, and then the project designed and financed and built.
Wow. And how many, was it apartments or single family, or how many units? Give us a sense of the unit.
54 townhomes for home ownership, affordable home ownership with Habitat for Humanity, East Bay.
Wow. Okay, I want to circle back to that project because I think that's interesting. Just to understand like the full life cycle of brownfield to housing. But maybe I guess maybe Sebastian, you could just give us a quick basic definition of a brownfield, just to level set.
Sure. Totally. A property with known or suspected contamination is really the general definition. Really the thing that we push at C-Clear to enable people to access a lot of resources is you don't have to know that there's contamination there, but the mere fact that you don't know and there could be is enough to make it a brownfield. And really what these could be in your community, depends on what the past industries and uses of sites used to be. So we've seen agricultural sites, gas stations. Like I said before, I worked in the chemical industry, so a lot of like the plant type things. Yep. Anything you want to add, Jim?
No, that's perfect.
Oh, one other expression I heard and I love. Every property is a brownfield until proven otherwise.
Right.
Particularly in a situation.
The mere fact of you don't know what's in the ground, right? Right. Until you go looking, until you go sampling.
But there is oh, sorry, go ahead. There is like a designation or a distinction between like just any site that could be suspect and then a site that has somehow gotten onto one of the databases, right?
Yeah, I mean, if the site is on one of like the databases, then there's likely confirmed contamination, and that's what we do in the phase 1. We see if there's recognized environmental conditions, if there's any histories of spills or some type of use which indicate there could be environmental pollution. It's important to check in. Really, the first step we encourage communities or anyone when looking at could they access a brownfield grant is to make an inventory. Just have an understanding of what are the underused properties, because even if there isn't necessarily contamination there, it could still have a perfect role in a reuse plan. As communities are adapting.
Yeah, and really any property in Oakland, in a city like Oakland, in the flatlands, particularly in the West Oakland and East Oakland, sort of the shore, the shoreline corridors area is going to be suspect and needs to be investigated. There was a good example in West Oakland of a church that owned a property in West Oakland, another ECRG awardee that, their phase 1 had originally came back clean, but the city or county didn't believe it, and so they made them do some testing, and they found significant contamination that needed to be cleaned up. Just because of 150 years of industrialized uses that even in residential areas, you don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of things.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes people didn't record, the spills that they had, or some of the like waste materials or things like that they may have buried on the property. So go ahead, Ed.
Right. So C-Clear works across the country, on projects across the country, right? Nationally?
Yep, absolutely. We used to also manage the U.S. EPA region, I think 2, with like New York, New Jersey, and more on the East Coast. But now it's U.S. EPA's region 9 and 10, and then we have different partnerships. And really try to get involved in every aspect of revitalization and redevelopment.
Okay. So you do have you guys do kind of focus on a region, sounds like, within the U.S.
A major part of our work is really those U.S. EPA Brownfield Technical Assistance Provider role for U.S. EPA Region 9 and 10. And that would be a cool graphic to pop up where you can sort of see the different division, because we have our counterparts, KSU and NGIT, that serve those roles in the different states.
Got it. Okay.
And then obviously, this ECRG work was a huge opportunity for C-Clear. And that's why a lot of us are located directly in California, where the organization was founded.
I see. Okay. I was wondering like what other business activities C-Clear does, but so it sounds like a big part of it is working on being a technical assistant to grantees on grants like ours.
Yeah, and also, in the whole Western United States for regions 9 and 10, plus Hawaii and uh, Alaska,
Got it.
the goal with the EPA seems to be to do a lot of trainings and conferences and different types of ways to help people like yourself to better utilize the system and work the system to make these things happen on these types of properties. So it's a lot of public education getting out there. That's why we do a conference every year, the California Land Recycling Conference in September, and there's a national Brownfields conference that CClear has historically been always a major provider of seminars and things. And this year, in August, we have over 9 or 10 different panels that CClear staff and consultants are presenting at, including my panel.
Thanks, Jim.
Nice.
And just a quick correction of something I said before. For US EPA, that's TAB, Technical Assistance for Brownfields. The BTAP is the acronym for DTSC, and that's probably gonna intro into our conversation later. Just how many acronyms are in the remediation world and public health and planning and what we're doing, right?
Yeah, you guys really don't make it easy on us average Joes. I did want to say though,
we didn't invent this either. No. I'm a victim here. Yep.
Well, I was gonna say yes. Like you guys were really instrumental in me putting this grant proposal together. I spent I don't know, months and months scheduling meetings, doing a lot of research, working with you, Sebastian, at the time, and some of your other colleagues to get the grant proposal together in the first round. And then we just weren't able to finalize it in time, so we had to get it through on the second. But yeah, you guys do great work, and I do want to definitely vouch for that. I don't know that I would have been able to put together our proposal without your technical assistance.
That's awesome, and we love to hear that. That's not new for us. I think there's a lot of great resources out there, and one of the biggest issues is people not having the resources or the ability to step up and manage these projects. And again, what we try to encourage people is now that you've done one grant, to not just think about this individual project, but to think about what's next, right? And I think a lot of people have been gaining experience in the ECRG program and sort of trying to use that to roll over into the next sites as well.
Yeah, we like to build capacity in community-based organizations that will be able to do this more again. And this is, once you get into it and learn this stuff, once you'll get addicted to it.
Yeah,
it's very challenging, but yet it's fulfilling at the end to be able to see the results.
Yeah. And the cool thing about Brownfields is it's really at the intersection of a lot of other needs that we have in this country and in our communities. Things like climate adaptation, housing, resilience, adapting infrastructure, and that means that you can just tap in to a lot of different financial options to make things possible.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that is something I'm not tapping into enough with you guys, is thinking about other grant opportunities to support our project. But I had a question about, just like, since you guys do have a pretty good overview in your work of at least the western regions of the U.S. and probably the whole country, what makes Oakland unique in its concentration of brownfields? Why do you think? Do you think that there is more in more brownfields in Oakland than the average city? Or are they just kind of par for the course? And if so, what's special or what's unique about Oakland?
Oh, definitely.
I'll go first and quickly, Jim, if you don't mind.
Oh, you want to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say that Absolutely. I think there's been a high industrial industry in Oakland for a while, which leads to a lot of the different brownfields. And I think the other unique thing about Oakland is the great history of the activism movement within the area, which definitely sort of shifts how brownfields have been dealt with. But I must admit, I live in Southern California, so I can't speak to the heart of the issue. What do you have to add, Jim?
Well, it's definitely helpful to have a perspective out from outside. I've been in Oakland working for 35 years, and um, I try to get around. I do love studying many other places, urban places around the world, and it's interesting. Oakland is a fairly unique, or not unique, but it's in a class that's a very majority of cities that had a very heavy concentration of industrial, because, and partly of that is because it's at the western terminus of the transcontinental railroad, and um, it developed into a major port, and it's also immediately across the bay, within striking distance of San Francisco, which has become a world-class city. And it's become San Francisco, or it did become, over many years, the industrial counterpart to, it's like a synergistic relationship with San Francisco. But just because of the creative class and the energy, like Sebastian was referring to in Oakland, there's a lot of has been a lot of revitalization. There's been a lot of revitalization and gentrification and other things that have meant that there's a force driving the redevelopment of this land, and is driving the price up. Is driving the the interest in actually cleaning up and working on these properties. If a city like, there's probably some other cities on the West Coast that have as much, you know, industrial as Oakland does, but because they haven't been redeveloped quite so much, they don't get the attention.
So, okay, maybe just as many toxic soils, but there's less people interested in using those sites. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, I guess I think one thing I wanted to highlight, have you guys run through. Oh, hey, what's up?
You made a great point on that. That's something I want to add. That's sort of specific about brownfields.
Yeah.
The reason why brownfield redevelopment makes so much sense in Oakland, LA, and a lot of these really dense urban areas is, the land is so valuable and so expensive, and the alternative is urban sprawl. And that's really why it serves us so much to address the brownfields, because we're making such a great decision in really adapting our cities and reducing our overall carbon footprint. So just wanted to say that both the market demand is what drives the brownfield redevelopment. Look at what's happened in New York City, for example. As well as just thinking about what the alternative to brownfield cleanup is.
Can you say a little bit more about what's happened in New York City? Because I don't know if I fully, or other people fully, get what what you mean there.
Oh, yeah. I can't speak in detail, unfortunately, Adam. I just know they've had a very successful storied program with a lot of economic incentives for brownfield cleanup.
Got it.
And I think it's just been a big success from what I've seen and heard.
Yeah, totally.
Actively turning around these properties. And I think they've also done a cool job with the soil bank, like a circular soil system. And just thinking about how, removing dirt or clean material from one site can go to another site that needs fill, and just thinking about the system holistically.
Huh. Yeah, right.
Bigger
go ahead.
Population density there, population and property density there, allows for just a maybe more efficient, but there's probably still also the same types of inefficiencies in there. Any big city And of course, that Brooklyn is often compared to Oakland
Right.
quite a lot, and that Brooklyn has gone through a similar, revitalization and redevelopment.
Yeah.
And why not mention the project everyone loves, right? Have you been to the High Line, Adam?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I used to live in New York. Yeah, I think it just got finished right around the time I left. Yeah.
Yeah, so think about that in the context of brownfield redevelopment, right? And thinking about old infrastructure and what that could be reused as. So
Yeah.
really, at its heart, it's a brownfield reuse project.
Yeah, totally. I think like the narrative that I sit with in West Oakland is that there, and also like kind of my lens of like looking at vacant lots constantly and seeing the potential of them to be little nooks for tiny home communities, um, is that there's a lot of, or there has been, I guess they're getting developed slowly but surely, but there's a lot of vacant lots in West Oakland. And so like, yeah, like my sort of narrative has always been that like it's, they sit there vacant because it's so dang expensive and complicated to get them usable. Um, but you guys are kind of also saying maybe a little bit of something different, which is that um, the need for using those sites is what kind of pushes the brownfields to get cleaned and redeveloped.
Right. We have the conflicting forces of what makes a site get cleaned up and redeveloped versus why it sits there forever. Yeah, and I always remember walking around cities and you see the properties with the big fences up, and you wonder how come no one's doing anything with that.
Right. Right.
And I was thinking about how I was going to answer your question today of why things take so long and how come they're so expensive.
Yeah.
And really, the one word that kept screaming at me from my time in like the chemical industry is it's just liability. It's and both in like the legal sense, but also in just the really real sense of like feeling liable for public health, right? Of what happens if
Right.
you open up a site and you haven't properly studied it, and what comes next. And that was a big reason of why when I started off working in the chemical industry, sites weren't really redeveloped. We would work with the regulatory agency to not get fined, to not get in trouble. But we would rarely ever actually, turn over a property because the risk of being sued was scarier than the other side of the opportunity to get the site off the books. But that started to change as brownfield redevelopment was growing as a field itself, and properties were more effectively found to the reuse. But yeah, I know that's not a very like exciting answer, but yeah, liability I really think is at the core of it.
No, that makes a ton of sense because we're such a litigious society, and when you say that, that makes me think it's like that's why the DTSC or whatever the water board, whatever the regulating body is such a pain in the butt and they require such a, well, that's my my framing, but they require so detailed reporting, and they take a long time with everything because if they pass something to be cleaned or safe, it's big liability on them, and then whoever's owning or controlling the property also has liability, right? Like I'm reminded of
you hit
right,
it 100%. That's why my experience in my past life working with regulators is that they were way more likely to not say anything versus giving you like firm approvals or things like that made them take liability for a decision versus having that ability to tell you when something was wrong. And I think that's been shifting in the regulatory field to try to work with people a little bit more, but that's still sort of a growing issue for them. Is ultimately everyone's working towards the same goal of getting the site cleaned up safely, right? Does it have to be so complicated? Do we have to look at it with such a fearful liability based lens?
Right.
But it comes from both directions because the regulators are so fearful, because some of these environmental justice organizations are going to hold their feet over the fire if something was thought to be done wrong. And there tends to be a very like Hollywood good versus evil narrative that's portrayed. Almost like the Aaron Brockovich type story of like the big industry versus the people.
Right.
And not to say it can't be that way or look that way. It's just the truth tends to be more complex. Just tends to be the science is difficult, that people don't necessarily understand what's in the material. But
yeah.
So
And real quick, I'm reminded of because I'm a real estate agent, and I did work with a group that was trying to lease a former gas station in East Oakland to turn it into a tiny home community. And the real estate agent representing the seller, the leaser, was basically said, "Yeah, it was a gas station, but it's been addressed. Here's some vague paperwork that says that." But then when I was helping to do some due diligence and contact, look them up on the database and all that, and contacted the water board, the county water board, they said, "Yeah, it's been cleared to be vacant. Like basically, we're okay with it just sitting vacant and not being a threat. But if you want to do anything on it, that's a different standard, and that means you're going to have to go through the process of investigating it and then cleaning it up." So we backed out of that lease. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe you guys could speak about that. Like, there's different levels. That was a big surprise to me. Like, I would have thought it's either, and the other agent thought,
I think at the core of that one is this idea of exposure pathways on a site, especially with what your organization does, is that when we're looking at like contamination and is a site safe, a big part of the answer of whether it's safe or not is what's going to happen at the site. Are people going to grow fruits and vegetables on the property? Are people going to be spending 1 hour a day there? Or are people going to be spending, in the case of housing, 24 hours a day there,
Right.
for instance? So, that's why there are different standards for cleanup. And also when they're looking at sites, they have to understand the exposure pathways. Anything you want to add, Jim? I know there's sort of like an Oakland specific angle to this that I'm probably missing.
Well, I think just the reality of real estate projects and the nature of the people involved. So it's not just a scientific sort of standard, and saying we need to meet that goal, but you've got these different players involved in the project. The workers that are going to be working in the construction and the cleanup, they have, they've made their voices known and advocated for high standards of just during the cleanup, just the workers' exposure, let alone the different constituency groups, whether it's going to be housing or a school or something like that. So all of those people have their advocacy groups yelling at not the regulators, but also the banks. The banks, that's why it's expensive. They have to charge extra for liability insurance and all this stuff. So it's just a lot of people involved, a lot of different parties involved, and it makes it more expensive.
Yeah. All right. I wanna jump into the basic kind of steps of going from like a dirty site, a brownfield site, to something that's clean enough to be residential, like the project you worked on, Jim. But this, like, these terms like phase 1, phase 2. Let's demystify some of that and kind of get people's heads around that, because we're going through that process right now in our project, and it can get a little confusing. So I'm hoping we can kind of educate people here on just like the basic typical process, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about our project's unique little shoehorn twists to it, and some of the problems that we're encountering because it's not typical.
Yeah, you go ahead, Sebastian.
Sounds good. Thanks, Adam. So like the typical life cycle. We have our inventory of sites, and we found a site that we've selected. The first question is there contamination there at all? It's a brownfield because there could be, but this is really that idea of a phase 1, which you're not actually doing any sampling on the property. This is more researching what past work has been done. What was the end use of the property? Looking at old pictures of the property to understand. Are there any strong reasons to believe that there's contamination on the property? And if there is, we would move towards the phase 2, just to evaluate those recognized environmental conditions and ask, what would be needed to clean up the site.
Right. And let me just jump in. So the phase 1 is a report, and it needs to be produced by a licensed geologist or soil engineer, right? By a consultant that usually charges quite a lot of money, right? Like what would you say the average, like if I'm thinking about budgeting for this, the average cost for a phase 1 is what, like $5,000 or $10,000 to pay the right type of
could be cheaper.
It's
such an it depends type industry, right? I would say more of like $2,000 to $5,000. So I think you're in the right ballpark for sure for like a more complicated property. But for a simple site, Anything you want to add, Jim?
No, that sounds about right. I was going to say.
And then that report has to get sent to the regulating body. You kind of have to decide who that regulating body is, whose jurisdiction is, right?
It depends on. I mean, it's really left up to the property owner, developer to kind of know and decide what path they want to take. Because if technically, legally, if all they were doing was financing a project on your own, that's a private project, you don't really need. You're getting a phase 1 to talk about the likelihood of there being any problems, but if you didn't have to rely on a bank or any public agency's involvement in your project, you could theoretically just end it there.
Yeah, a big part of this, Adam, is we're talking about like the voluntary site cleanup.
Okay.
One of the questions that's going to be asked by a consultant or anyone like looking at the property is there any immediate threat to human health or like the environment because of the contamination on the property? If in that case, there could be a reporting requirement directly to DTSC to be involved with an enforcement action, or who knows for the property, or again, sort of site dependent. But if it's a voluntary site, then that means that the site owner likely has the choice to decide if they want to work with the local water board, work with DTSC, or there can be other local jurisdictions. AB 304, I think is the code. AB 304 certified. So, for instance, Los Angeles Fire Department is the regulatory oversight for one of our ECRG projects. So there's a good deal of freedom.
Well, that's interesting. So that means that like I guess two questions come up. One is like, what about the scenario where you are kind of, let's say you want to build housing on a site. I want to build a tiny home community on a site, but the planning department says, hey, or the county health department says, hey, as I'm applying, this is on the database as a brownfield, so you've got to show us that this is safe. That would be, I guess that would still be considered voluntary, because then I want to develop it, I'm volunteering to go through a process.
Exactly, and that's what organizations like yours and municipalities are often looking at.
And that brings up another issue is that, just getting a building permit or planning approval for something doesn't always trigger things. So, and that really is that depends on the local jurisdictions, their level of understanding and oversight, because for the building department and planning department, where I worked for many years in those type of environments in a local government, that's not one of their standard requirements that they have to check on whether the site has been cleaned up to a certain standard.
I see.
They may know, they should know, and they should advise developers. Like increasingly now, we're running to the situation where, because the law has changed around requirements for phase ones, the requirement of the all appropriate inquiry, which is required now by various federal programs and state programs and everything. So we're encouraging a lot of local planning departments and those kinds of things to alert developers and buyers that before they take ownership of a property, you have to have that phase one by a licensed engineer, like you say, who's going to independently certify that there is not a likelihood of contamination. Because otherwise, the person that takes ownership of the property without that is then liable.
Liable for the for if somebody has some kind of health issue.
Liable for the contamination. Exactly. This is a really big deal. And if we share resources as part of this, I think this would be a great thing to drop with people. We oftentimes, like Jim said, municipalities need to know about this, but tribes really need to know about this as people give land back, to make sure that they're doing the proper due diligence and having an environmental professional look at the past documentation. That way that they don't become liable, and that way they also remain eligible for U.S. EPA MARC funding, because a big part of grants, and ECRG was the same way, is that you can't be liable for the contamination. So good addition, Jim.
I got it. Okay, so I do remember learning about that at the Brownfield conference last year, is that like if you ever do acquire a piece of land, make sure you do the phase one as part of your due diligence so that you're eligible for these grant opportunities to do the cleanup. But are you saying that if I was going to be given land, if I'm, say, a tribe or a nonprofit rather, and I don't do I do the phase one, and it comes back, it's real dirty, then I'm not liable, even though I take ownership over it? Who's liable then?
Yeah, well,
I see that it's dirty and I don't take ownership.
You're not considered a responsible party. It clarifies the fact that you are no longer a responsible party in the chain of the litigation systems. So
I see. So I could go back to the old owner and try to get them to cover the cost of cleanup potentially through a lawsuit.
Theoretically.
I see. Okay. All right. Okay.
It's really just it's enforcing that idea that like ignorance isn't a legal defense, Adam. That when you're acquiring a property, it's your responsibility to perform all appropriate inquiries and to review the environmental conditions. And this became such a significant deal, with the ECRG, because we were realizing that there was a large gap in people understanding this, this important piece of work. Yeah, and I think it's great that we're bringing it up now.
Yeah, a number of nonprofit
people from getting millions of dollars necessary to clean up these properties sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, a number of nonprofits and cities were deemed ineligible for the state ECRG round 2 because they had been given, as you say, they had been given land, or they had acquired the land without doing the phase 1 because they assumed that they were going to do the cleanup anyway or whatever, and
right. Wow, that's really interesting. I mean, the other interesting thing you said, Jim, is that if the planning department is not well staffed and thinking about it, you could slide one past them, it sounds like, which is kind of what I know an owner of my former tiny house community that has that philosophy, that he'll just apply to do his development and just ignore the whole no, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no brownfield, and then get it through. I kind of thought that somebody would catch it along the way, but it sounds like what you're saying is not necessarily. They could just get their building permits approved and go ahead and construct. So there are lots of sites out there that may be toxic, and are housing, but we don't know unless testing is done.
Yeah, I think that's a similar. A lot of people have that opinion that if they just let's keep the government out of it, and the EPA and DTSC away, and what we don't know is not going to hurt anybody.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, but I derailed us because you were just starting with the first the first step in this journey to a clean site, which is the phase 1. So you send that report, the consultant sends that report to the regulating body, and then do they have comments?
No, you might not have it. You don't have to report that yet. The phase 1, because you're not under regulatory oversight. Right.
Yeah. It's only a bank will often require it if you're getting a loan,
right?
And some other partners, if you're in development with other partners or other uses, they might want to see that.
Right. But that's part of your due diligence.
Yeah.
Okay. So you just hold that. Okay.
Right now, you're asking questions. Is there contamination?
Right.
So really the first question is there contamination? The second question is, what is the contamination? What's the, how deep does it go on site? How far does it go on site? And then the final question that you really need the regulatory agency for is what are we going to do about it? Right? What's the cleanup approach? What are we cleaning up to? What's the reuse? But those first questions, that a consultant can work on by themselves.
So those 3 questions are kind of the 3 phases. Is that accurate? Is there contamination? And then phase 2 would be what and how deep is the contamination? And that's done through testing. And then
sampling.
And phase 3 would be what are we going to do about it, which is a cleanup plan. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly a super high level. So the first step, is that phase 1. Phase 2 is really the, what is it? Doing the sampling. How far does it go? And then when we move on to that, we're doing the remedial action work plan. And really understanding what are we going to do about it based on the intended reuse for the property. And it's like a weird chicken and an egg type scenario of does the contamination determine what we do with the property, or can we deal with the contamination to a higher level to do something else with the property? So oftentimes if the contamination is really bad, it might limit the potential end uses.
Right. And that's one reason why, the phase 2 process and the investigation is becoming more and more expensive, because you want to test and identify a wide range of things. It depends, especially if you don't know exactly what and where is going to be developed on the property. Now, if you have a very specific plan already in mind, and you kind of and a very specific use already in mind, then you can narrow down exactly what and where you want to test for things. But if these big sites, 2 acre, and if there's a question about the plan, exactly the footprint, where it's going to go, then then you need to take a lot of tests.
Yep.
So an example
of what we see, just to add one thing, Adam, with sort of this like end use idea. If people are looking at a brownfield specifically with something like housing in mind, that means it could be a very fast moving project where they want the cleanup to happen in 6 months or sooner. Right. Versus something like a park or an open space, where there could be potential for a cleanup to take years or more of a nature-based solution because we have more time to work with in thinking about what comes next.
I see.
So that I just wanted to add that element of what I meant with the sort of like the chicken and the egg. Of, how do we think about this next life for the property, and to what degree do we already know that? Versus how much the contamination sort of limits what we do. Yeah, because some contamination can just be very, very costly to deal with, where to get things to, safe enough levels for housing or for people to farm on it would just be very cost prohibitive.
Well, yeah, totally. I mean, one of the things I kind of learned in talking to one of the DTSC staff who was assigned to our Brownfields case was that my proposed idea of a tiny house community might be able to be okayed for maybe a less clean site because of the idea of capping the land with maybe mulch or maybe asphalt, and the fact that the homes would actually be floating above the surface on wheels or on jack stands rather than a typical home that's tied into a foundation and really integrated into the soil below the soil, and so there's vapor transfer risks and stuff like that. So he was saying, yeah, you could maybe get away with developing a dirtier site with this approach as opposed to housing, like traditional housing. But Jim, like when you said if you know specifically what you're going to do on a site, you might be able to kind of save some time and money in the phase 2 testing part. Would that mean like if, say you had a design where maybe you're just going to have you're only going to have a yard, let's say for a housing scenario, a yard in a certain part of the land, and that maybe it's like a former gas station, and that the tanks were in the back of the lot, and you're going to kind of design so that the building, I guess, is above the tanks and capped, but the yard spaces towards the front where there's less toxicity. Yeah. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yes, that's that you can do that. And there are ways to then use the site planning and the building construction of the site grading and work to complement the plan and also accommodate whatever potential exposure pathways there are there.
I see.
And I mean on a huge, and that happens at many projects on a small or large scale. I mean, there's a couple acre site on Wood Street there, just a few blocks away from you, that Habitat for Humanity and Mid-Penn Housing are in the investigation stage for housing on that site, and it's large enough to know that there were different uses that were part of the train station or the tracks or things that are more contaminated and need to be tested more and cleaned up more or potentially treated differently. Yeah. And so that that can influence their site plan of how they design the project. But at a really big scale, I was fortunate to be working on the redevelopment plan for Hunters Point Shipyard from 1990, or like around 1995 to 1997, or somewhere. And we were creating a land use plan for 500 acres that had it was a super fun site. And they had to plan out the usage of the land on a really long-term basis based on what they thought the ability to clean that up.
Huh. Wow. All right. So phase 2, that is where our project is in the middle of that. And so let me rattle off a little bit of what I've learned from that process, because we had to develop a work plan. The consultants had to develop a work plan that took maybe 1 or 2 months to develop, and then
a sampling work plan, right?
Right. Like, what specifically are we going to test? Where are we going to test? How are we going to test? And then the DTSC reviewed it for about a month, and then they said, make these changes. It was like a book report with like these edits. I used to be a journalist, so here's the edits you got to do. Then our consultants sat on it for maybe another month and a half or 2 months, doing those revisions, sent it back, got another month went by. Then the DTSC said, actually, make all these other changes. Okay. Then the consultants sat on it for another month or two. And then finally, in version 3, the DTSC said, okay, good. And then we had to wait, another month or so for just the logistics of scheduling the actual testing, which all happened in one day. And the cost, I'm still kind of getting my head around it because I've seen probably 7 invoices from the consultants on that, but it's pretty expensive. Could you guys give us a sense of the cost range for a phase 2? I know it depends on the type, the size of a site and a lot of other variables, but maybe you could give us just a ballpark. So it was $2,000 to $5,000 for a phase 1. For a phase 2, and by the way, phase 2 is not only paying the consultant, but it's also paying the DTSC or whatever the regulating body. Is it always the case that the regulating body is charging you for their staff time to review your
if you're liable for the contamination, yes. And for like it really depends on your voluntary agreement. But totally, no, it's a good question. And so a way bigger range on the phase 2 than the phase 1, I would say, because the phase 2, now we're doing actual sampling, and based on what used to be at the site might dictate, how many things you have to sample for. And there are certain types of tests that can be really pricey. But phase 2, if there is real sampling going on, I think more about at least $5,000 going up to like $30,000.
Okay, but that doesn't include. But that's just testing. I mean, what about paying the DTSC staff hours and the consultants' time?
Or also include, if you're part of a program that's requiring community outreach, like in your case, you have to factor in the cost of that and other project management from the owner's side to just manage all these pieces and oversee it. So it's definitely, the cost adds up for the more complicated the project. It exponentially almost increases, but there's a fixed basic cost. Like why it's only on, how big is your site now? It's like just a quarter of an acre.
1,800 square feet, I think. Yeah,
it's not even quarter of an acre, or like about a quarter of an acre, I guess. And that investigation could cost similar to other 2-acre sites.
Right. Well, I mean, one thing I've learned from this conversation, so from our testing, I guess I'm jumping into some of the messiness of our program here. So we'll come back to, or let's just finish off real quick before I jump into that. So you got your phase 1. You don't necessarily have to give it to anybody. You just hold it. It helps you for getting grants and stuff like that and avoiding liability. Then you have to engage with the regulator, decide on who your regulator is, sign a voluntary regulation agreement, right? Sign a contract. That's an important step. And then you go through this process that I outlined of the phase 2 and the testing. And then walk me through this part that I'm kind of in the middle of right now, just so I'm clear. Because after you get the results from the tests, your consultant reviews them and puts together a report called a PEA report, right? That's pretty standard, and that's how would you define that report, and what's it for, and what's coming next? Because I'm scared, guys, given how long and expensive it's taken just to get to this moment.
PEA is the preliminary and danger assessment. California specific type thing. But I totally hear you. A major option either after this is developing an ABCA,
APCA.
which is
Okay.
now some brownfield cleanup alternatives, which is again just getting further down this line. Um, if we are going to do something about the contamination, what is the cleanup going to be?
So that's like a report before the cleanup report. It's like kind of looking at the menu of options, the APCA. Is that right?
I like that way of summarizing it. Yep, building a menu of the options.
And just in lay terms, it's exactly what it is. It says endangerment assessment. It's identifying, the causes for concern and what would be needed to be cleaned up.
Right.
Yeah,
and that really gets to the liability that you spoke about, right? That's the heart of the liability.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not just, human health. It's thinking about, the different environmental receptors. Are things going into the water, for example? Is contamination leaving the site? And really just doing this larger risk evaluation, which is another, big aspect of why it's so expensive and why it takes so long. Is that risk evaluations are very complex and very technical, especially, based on the different contaminants we have. They could be, emerging contaminants, for example. And,
what's an emerging contaminant? What's an example of that?
Yeah, the one in the news, and it feels like the wrong title for it. Maybe a true emerging contaminant would be like nanoparticles or microplastics. Microplastics is a big deal, Adam.
Okay, right.
But
right.
PFAS, perfluorinated alkaline substances. So coming from Teflon, these were non-stick or chemicals used for their non-stick properties, also used within firefighting foam.
Right.
And the big aspect of why they were used is because they don't break down very easily. The issue that we're finding now is that they don't break down very easily, and they're everywhere. And so they bioaccumulate, and they likely give people cancer.
It's emerging. It's emerging because we didn't know about this until recently. So it's new.
Because this is man-made. This is industrial. We only just stopped producing them in this country, a couple decades ago, and we're finding that PFAS is in the blood supply of everyone within industrial society, because it does just spread within water so quickly. So the question then becomes, if it's everywhere, how much is a safe level to have? And
right.
That's what I mean in terms of like this complex conversation of risk. Because, right, we're talking about humans' health, safety. And if you ask the average person, I don't want any of it there. Right. And that might not always be practical. So PFAS is a big one that they talk about with emerging contaminants. And that was just added to AAI and like the phase 1 standards that you have to be evaluating, sort of the PFAS exposure and risks on properties. But the other big thing is microplastics. This idea of just, these little tiny, particles that can get everywhere. And again, can just interrupt natural processes.
Wow. So maybe part of, because the consultants did kind of mention, they're throwing all this new stuff at us. So maybe that's part of it. There's like this.
And you have PCBs, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, now we're talking potential arrowchlor science and just very technical, not that well known type material. And we're trying to ask just a very simple question of, is it safe? Right. And that it depends answer just is taking you so much in the weeds of how do we even evaluate that with the regulator. And, it's got to be frustrating when you're going back and forth, 3 times.
Yeah.
I'm sure you had this, but the one thing I'll mention is the importance of having like a scoping meeting or getting people all on a call, because I don't like trading emails with people nonstop. If we can just have like an hour meeting with everyone on the call or the room to just talk about expectations right away. Which is what people advise in this field. We've been getting so many like letter writing battles back in my chemical company days, which were really just ultimately a waste of time because the sites weren't being cleaned up,
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, like, even though you guys told me to do that and we did do one of those, I'm just still not aware enough about all these little nuances and
Sure.
potential pathways to kind of make things more efficient if I say this or ask this question. So I wasn't probably able to make use of that moment as best as I could. But
Well,
yeah,
you
yeah,
have to rely on the consultant and, you know, build that relationship and trust with a consultant to represent your interest as an intermediary to a regulatory agency like DTSC, because they talk the same language. They know what's going to be possible within the realm of what DTSC is interested in.
yeah,
It's harder for any property owner, let alone somebody who's relatively new at this, to be able to understand it and anticipate and know how to use that.
yeah,
So you kind of have to rely on the consultant as an intermediary.
yeah. So right now, what I've been told, because this is kind of where the weirdness is that because we're trying to do a pilot bioremediation experiment in this moment, this 2-year moment of investigating, which seems to be in conflict with the way the DTSC is thinking about the process. I don't know. We'll see. I get different stories that I don't fully understand every time I talk to them. But one thing that they've highlighted is that in a typical process, you get the PEA report. They're going to sit on it and review it. And then they might say, well, maybe you need to test for X, Y, and Z and test in, go do more testing in these other locations. Is that right? And if they do say that, then then the consultants need to develop a work plan. It's going to be a smaller work plan to plan the logistics of doing that test. And then I guess the DTSC is going to have to review that work plan. There might be some iterations there. And then we're going to have to do a mini version of basically the process we just went through.
Ideally, yes, there might be more sampling done, but instead of determining the exposure assessment, now we're doing that sampling purely to design the cleanup plan, or to understand the standards or the baseline conditions for any pilot work or anything like that. So yes, we might be sampling again, but there's a different intention, Adam. Just to state.
Okay, so once the PEA report has been submitted, we have really entered the third phase of what are we going to do about it, and we're on the process of kind of
we're designing a remedial action plan. Yep.
Right. Okay, that's helpful. Okay.
Yeah. So often, any further testing can be assumed to happen during the actual cleanup. So there's often.
Okay.
Hopefully there's no further testing until you actually pull that trigger, and you have enough. The ideal is you have enough information. That's why we encourage all the consultants to go overboard on the testing now, so you have enough information that you can get yourself to that cleanup plan without a lot of testing toward that back end during the cleanup planning.
You want to begin with the end in mind, right? Think about what you're ultimately trying to do with the site, and the big fancy word is your contamination delineated? And delineation just means we understand the extent of it, the levels, because it can be really expensive and really difficult to chase contamination in the field, which means like doing the cleanup and having to do sampling live to find out how far we need to go. You really try to avoid that in the project and just know, where the contamination is before you, you start.
I see. Okay. Yeah. In our example, the high level kind of like summary of the tests, the findings was that we tested in 3 locations, right? Basically front, middle, back. And the back was where we found the highest concentrations of everything. There was pretty high concentrations, maybe close to the acceptable level or just a little over the acceptable level of say lead and PCBs in the first two holes, but the back hole was like way high on all those metrics. And so the bioremediation consultant, basically her work plan proposal is that we mix all the soil, kind of put a rotor tiller through the soil, kind of make it more homogeneous so that there's less of a hot spot in the back, and then create 9 different subplots of like 10 by 12 feet, and then do experiments on various remediation, experiments to see what's working best. But when I kind of teased that to the DTSC, to some of the staff, these were not the scientists. This was like the project manager. They said, "Well, that's not going to work because, then you're mixing up the contaminants all around." But I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Because it seems like now I'm also learning from this conversation. Maybe we conceive of our reuse plan as that back area, we cap it, we put a tiny home there, and then we just kind of work on trying to remediate the front part of the area that's a little less concentrated.
Yeah, and maybe sequencing your project makes sense. I could totally see why that could give a regulatory body a little, miniature heart attack, because you're taking contamination and now you're proposing to mix it in areas where it was previously at lower levels.
Yeah.
So again, if you're not able to clean it up, there's that idea of what have you done, right? And it's a different approach. And anytime you're trying to do something differently, there can be a lot of friction. So I think it can totally make sense, because for natural processes, they tend to be more efficient when we have a certain level. But yeah, it's challenging and unique, but it might make sense for this site, Adam.
Yeah, well, maybe this is a good moment. I know we're almost approaching time here, but this is probably a good moment to jump into the bioremediation aspects of our project and how it breaks the brains of the DTSC folks, and how maybe you can help me strategize on how to get through, because our hope is to do a year experiment, and we have less than a year left in the grant cycle right now. And so I'm concerned about how we're going to actually get this done. I'm brainstorming on like maybe we fill a bunch of bathtubs or something with soil and experiment with it that way. I don't know, or tubs. But I don't know. Maybe you guys could just explain, why is it that, like, when I went to the Brownfields conference last fall, and I would just mention our project to these like longtime developers who specialize in brownfields, they were like, they had never heard of this as an option of being able to clean up using in situ, using biological processes. I mean, and I guess connected to that, like, why? I remember you, Sebastian, and when I first pitched this, you were like, "Dude, it's probably going to be dig and haul. Dig and haul is what we all do. That's going to be the fastest and most, financially expedient." Like,
I'm not sure if I said financially expedient. I don't think that one, because that's the advantage. So with that intro, I'll talk about nature-based solutions real quick and bioremediation, because I'm very passionate about this. Go ahead, Em.
Oh yeah, no, and just also, like, why is it not as well known in the brownfield world, and especially like with these regulators?
Absolutely. I think at a basic level, it's the certainty that dig and haul offers versus bioremediation. It's this idea of we literally took what was wrong with the site, the contamination, and we put it somewhere else, and so we now know it's not there and it's safe. Versus something like in situ approaches, bioremediation, chemical oxidation. We're leaving the contamination in place, and we're doing something where we're degrading it, which means we have to show it worked. right? And we need to have more time. And, there's just a lot more uncertainty thrown into the process of what is a relatively new industry. And people like, more shortcut, easy solutions that oftentimes excavation offers.
Right.
But I think that bioremediation can tend to be a lot cheaper ultimately, just because sending things to a landfill, especially in California, costs a lot of money and tends to be the most expensive aspects of the project. So working in the chemical industry, we did evaluate bioremediation quite often for exactly that reason. And we were dealing with a lot of, sort of unique chemistry where we would, sort of enter these pilots with universities elsewise, just because if we could find a way, for 50,000 tons of soil to not leave the site, that could be saving millions of dollars, right? So finding a way to do that safely. But again, it's that question of liability and how do you know that it's safe to leave things on the site? Yeah. And yeah, I think I touched most of it, except for this large sort of paradigm shift that I like people to think about. When you think of environmental cleanups, do you think of big yellow equipment, or do you think of micromediation, mushrooms and plants breaking things down? What do you think of, Jim?
Well, yeah, I think that is right on. But
no,
also,
I mean, real quick, when you think of environmental cleanups, do you think of big yellow equipment, or do you think of mushrooms and trees breaking down?
Even I think. Are you asking Adam?
No, I'm asking you first.
You.
Oh, yeah. I think of big yellow equipment.
I know, and Adam, you might think of the mushrooms because you're part of the paradigm shift. But anyone that works in the industry, they will tell you that really, the heavy construction processes is what's used, and I think that offers just an opportunity for environmental cleanups to make more environmental sense. I think that's where bioremediation can be part of that. But changing any industry takes time, and so that's why you're sort of going through the struggles of an early adapter, right?
I see.
I'm right in the middle. I see. Yeah. I can totally understand, and I support the kind of community-based and the site-based, nature-based solutions. But another reason why I think you don't see it on land cleanups, because usually in the real estate world, time is money. And so even though it might cost you less out of pocket to clean up on site with bioremediation, the fact that it's going to take a lot longer, the time is money. And so there's the certainty and also the expediency of getting rid of it.
Yeah, that's what I was that's the words that I was trying to put in your mouth before, Sebastian. Financial expediency. It was the time is money point that you made to me.
I guess it's it makes more financial sense when you don't have the benefits of time. And so often, if people aren't thinking about bioremediation early, it's already too late because it takes so much time to evaluate. Like you're obviously feeling within your project of just the back and forth where, if you had a more conventional approach, it could have been a potentially a lot simpler, right?
Yeah. But I mean, two big takeaways I'm getting from this conversation that is opening my mind to maybe how to do this project better if I could go back in time, or how to do the next, it's this liability and this point of that's connected to it about uncertainty when you're not digging and hauling and you're trying to treat the soil on site. So I'm just curious, like, given both of your guys' intimacy with these processes and these types of projects, like, I don't know, how can we solve for and relieve some of the time and money that comes with the liability and the uncertainty? I mean, we talked a little bit about like thinking more clearly about your reuse plan, and so your reuse plan can kind of work with what you're given as far as the hot spots, or maybe you change what you're going to do based on what you find there. But specifically with like this bioremediation approach, I don't know if I'm putting you guys on the spot, but are there ideas that you guys are seeing on ways to push this paradigm shift further and kind of deal with the uncertainty? I mean, one thing is like when you're not doing dig and haul, you then have to do some sort of testing. And dig and haul, there's no testing, right? In a typical process?
There is. There's going to be like your verification testing, and you have to design it.
Oh, okay. So that's the same.
I think, a big aspect in making this easier is supporting the community of practice, in raising the bioremediation projects that were successful. Like I said before, beginning with the end in mind, and I think that's why the reuse aspect is so important. So either, evaluating this technology early, or thinking about where on your site you could have more time for an ongoing sort of cleanup part. And I think there are a lot of things that work towards the advantage of nature-based solutions, because, like your project or otherwise, they can tie really well into workforce development, and a lot of environmental justice themes of people dealing with the contamination themselves and listening to the community voices, and just, the education possibilities. I think it's really inspiring to think about the ways we can work with nature to deal with contamination versus just digging it up and putting it under plastic in a landfill somewhere. Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's inspiring, but I see a conflict there too, Sebastian, because like when I'm thinking about the liability and the uncertainty, my mind goes to, all right, well, one way to address the liability is like, if you're going to do a bioremediation, you're going to talk about how you're going to wall off that site for a long period of time so that there's less vulnerability of contaminant pathways. Like basically no people, no animals on the site for the next year. We're going to plant these mushrooms. They're going to work their magic, and there's going to be less risk because we're going to lock the gates. But that's in conflict with the vision that you just outlined, which is like, this is an opportunity for community members to get involved and get paid.
It's finding the right blend. Absolutely. I have a suggestion, if you don't mind, just because we have 5 minutes left, and this is such a good conversation thread that I can't pretend we'll solve in 5 minutes. Is maybe thinking about a bioremediation focused one, with Danielle Stevenson or someone else more versed in those specifics, because I totally agree. I think those conflicts are what you're dealing with, just because, like you brought up this idea of putting in, soil in bathtubs, and it just made me shiver, because liability, and thinking through things like, HAZWOPER, and just, not just, the regulations, when it comes to managing hazardous material, but people's real safety and making sure that they're doing it properly. So, you bring up sort of this conflict, right, of people working directly on the contamination in their area with the idea of like the exposure of people. And yes, I totally agree. That's why anyone working, has to get HAZWOPER trained. Right. But I think there are a lot of really cool workforce development opportunities in bioremediation going on right now. I think within the Bay Area, there's the REAP Center is doing some cool workforce development. They might be a cool group to talk to.
Yeah. I know Jonathan DeLong. I know that. Yeah, I've seen that whole project.
Oh, cool. You might know more than I do, just because you're more local. But I think what they're doing is very inspiring, and speaks towards projects like yourself. And that's why I bring up this idea of like the community of practice, because you talk with some people within the industry, and they might think you're crazy for pushing bioremediation just because they haven't seen it done before. Versus some of us, it just makes more sense. That if we could find a way to deal with contamination and actually break it down, and break it down in place versus just shipping somewhere else, why wouldn't we do that? Because we
Yeah.
only have so much space on this planet.
Right. Awesome. Well, I guess to bring us home, we kind of teased you went through the full life cycle of the project, and we've been trying to dance around what a typical project looks like, timeline and budget wise. But Jim, I don't know if you could kind of breeze us through that East Oakland project that you worked on. I mean, after the PE, or maybe just bring us in from the PEA moment for your project and kind of walk us through the life cycle there. Like for yours, you got the PEA done, and then you worked on a cleanup plan, and maybe you could tell like how, if you remember, or give a ballpark of how much that last phase 3. Do they call it a phase 3? I haven't heard anybody call it a phase 3. No. So they just say phase 1, phase 2, and then it's cleanup plan. Is that right? So the cleanup plan moment, talk me through how that goes, how it can go awry, cost, timeline, average, and then what happens when you're ready to build?
Well, it's been so long. I honestly, I don't. It's been over 25 years since we did that planning and design exercise. So,
but just like, I guess maybe an average job, average process.
Yeah, I couldn't give you a realistic ballpark on that, but because in that time I was a relatively young, real estate developer, housing developer, and I was forced to rely on the consultants to produce a plan that met DTSC's requirements, and I had to basically trust them. And fortunately, that's where C-Clear comes in, can come in as a sort of somewhat independent party. And in those days, it was more of an independent party. Yeah. Now on the ECRG, we are being kind of employed by DTSC to help them, so we're not completely independent on your project. But it can be, C-Clear can be the type of independent voice that can help you look at what the consultants are doing and make sure that they're not overdoing it, and looking at the regulatory side and make sure they're not overdoing it. But you've got to, have those kind of trusted advisors and representatives on your team, unless you're a very experienced property developer who already has been through it a number of times.
Well said. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that C-Clear can offer folks is that technical assistance, which thanks to these EPA and DTSC grants is free to the people signing up. So, if you're working on one of these projects and you have questions, please reach out to us, because, like Jim is saying, like working directly with your consultant who is then billing you for the work that they do can feel challenging sometimes.
Totally. All right. That's a good wrap up point there. But maybe just because I got the practical curiosity, maybe you guys could give me a ballpark of, or Sebastian, I know because you dealt with a lot of projects back in the day in the chemical. Mm-hmm. What was what's the range of a dig and haul? The cost of a dig and haul, just to give a sense, because that's like the big point of our project, is to try to save money. Right.
Like you're probably not taking dirt out of the ground for less than 50,000, but I managed some projects where we spent over 10 million, Adam.
10 million just to do the dig and haul. Wow.
Yeah, just to excavate and dispose of material, because it can cost you, $100 to get the material somewhere, and then still have to pay the landfill another $100. And I'll tell you, within California, there's a hazardous waste generator fee, which you then get billed for, which again, can really explode your costs, which is why it can serve you so much, for my last mention, to really think about nature-based solutions in situ and what you could do instead of excavating and shipping off the material.
Awesome. And then I'll just leave us with that question of what happens, like from an environmental standpoint, with when you dump that soil in whoever's community it's dumped in. how is that better for the health of the environment and the people, whoever's around? I don't.
Totally.
I
No,
don't know.
it's a huge environmental justice issue, and in California, it's really controversial because we tend to ship our waste out of state, right?
Right.
And that's not a great idea, and not very respectful, especially of tribal lands, which are so often associated with these facilities in Arizona and Nevada, for instance.
Yeah.
So I'll say that landfills are regulated, so they are making sure that waste isn't leaving those properties. But like you're alluding to, I don't think it's a solution that makes long-term sense, especially as we're looking at PFAS and future contaminants. Right, we can't just keep digging up material and sending it to other places. What are we going to do next? Right, send it to Mars?
Yeah. Great point.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Do you guys have any other things you want to add, Jim or Sebastian, to close this out?
That's a good wrap up, and thank you for helping make this process more understandable.
Yeah. Exactly. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for your project, Adam, for inviting us. And if you're in the California area, please consider joining C-Clear at the California Land Recycling Conference. That's where I met Adam in person, and I think in this remote age, it's even more important to get to those conferences, to make the meetings and meet people in person.
Is that next year? Is that this year?
It's this year. It's September.
Okay, cool.
Let's get that right. I put the link in the chat.
Oh, cool. So the other one is in Chicago, but that's
September
a different one.
16th through 18th, and there's a lot of cool sessions. A big focus. Obviously, it's taking place in LA, is thinking about the fire recovery and resources there, talking about community voices, some technical topics. And like we said before, one of the advantages is that we have nonprofits, municipalities, and the regulators there directly. So you can talk to DTSC and the EPA about what you're experiencing on your site.
Awesome. All right. Thank you guys so much. You guys are awesome. I will talk to you guys later.
Super cool.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Adam.